So I just thought I'll show you some of the trees that we've already that we normally find in paintings. So say this is one where it's just part of the thing ending at the top, and then we have a lot of leaves here and some of the foreground grasses and leaves or whatever here, some little water. This is another one similar to that. So we have a tree with some leaves getting cut off at the top. So it's not very common to see a full tree like this in any of the paintings, but the method is still the same. We have this kind of thing again, starting here, going up, because in our when we have a kind of a view finder, and we have this much in our view, we normally never get to see the entire thing. So this is the kind of thing that we'll be doing. Some texture in the bark, a little bit of texture in how to show the leaves, different types of leaves, and a little bit of, say, these foreground grasses. So you could have a painting that is just one tree, or you could have a painting where the tree is just part of it and there are a lot of other things. There's something in the background, there's some sky, sea, flowers, stones, fish, whatever. So that's what we're going to do today. I'm going to try and draw it out first. And I don't really have to be very, very exact with it. I'm using a blue pencil because I just happen to have this blue lead, and I like this a little bit because it kind of melts into the paint when I do it. But any pencil will be okay. Don't bother too much about the pencil. And what I'm going to do is, with the same pencil, I'm just going to try and understand where the shadows of the tree are happening. So wherever it is darker, I'm just going to try and figure it out with the same pencil. Why I've chosen this tree is, well, I can't really go out and pick out more trees right now, but I also thought it was a little bit interesting because of the shape and so this tree, this one is behind this one. I think they're both growing together and kind of intertwined. So this part will get a little bit darker, but there is some amount of light happening here. this tree is going up like that, and I think this one is going on top and getting intertwined somehow. I'm not able to make out much, but whatever it is, it's quite an interesting tree. And this part is also in the shadow of these leaves, and somebody's probably cut this branch, so we're going to leave it cut like that. We could have changed it, but I quite like it this way. So all this is in shadow, all this is in shadow, and then this thing, okay, and there is some amount of shadow happening here. So that's it. Now we'll get down to the painting. So the tree bark, normally one would paint it brown, but it's not always brown. If you look at it carefully, there will be different shades of red and green and maybe where it's reflecting the sky or the area around it. There'll be a lot of colors in it. So we try to see all those colors as well. And even if we want to introduce our own, that's fine, just to make it a little more interesting. You don't really have to stick to, because this is a painting, it's not a photograph, if we had to make it exact. So you are allowed to shift it a little bit. So what I'm going to do is try and make a little bit of a yellowish brown first, and like we know in watercolors, we go from light to dark, which means the first color that I put in will be light, and then I can keep going as dark as I want on it. So like I said, I quite like the texture of the blue thing that is happening here. And I don't mind whatever color I put here. There's a little bit of orange and there's a little bit of, if you look carefully at the photograph, and there's a little bit of this green that's happening here. Some of these background colors will show, some will probably not show, and that's okay. We don't really mind. And here there's, I think it's a little more orangish dark, so I'm just going to make it this is darker still. So when I add the paint, more paint on what is already there, and while it's wet, it tends to just melt into each other and not stay very dark at the end of it. So and it kind of blends in it a little bit, which is nice if that's what we want. If we don't want it to blend, then we just wait for it to dry. And right now I'm not going to be too fussy about it, so I'm going to allow it to blend and mix the way it wants to. And if you notice, I'm putting a little bit of green with the brown here. Just because this to me is looking a little bit more reddish, so I'm going to add a little bit more red. And I'm just adding the colors wherever I'm seeing them. If I let the colors mix too much at this time, then they will all blend into one another, which is not what I want. So I'm not letting them blend too much, I'm just placing them next to each other. I'm just keeping them on top of each other. Now, what I'm going to do is something very interesting. I think the children will like it. I'm going to use this. Now, I'm going to leave this because it's a little bit wet. But meanwhile, I'm going to try and work on the leaves that are not touching this part. And the first leaves, like I said, we do the lighter part first, is the part that's yellowish, which I can see here. So the water just blends into it and makes it look all fuzzy. Where there's no water, it stays. Where there is a little bit of water, it becomes fuzzy. And then there's a little bit of green here, light green. Because the light will come here, this part will be under shade, so that part will be a little darker and this part will be lighter. Sometimes it tends to dry out a little bit, so we kind of I'm actually just painting dots now on it. Because the leaves are like dots. And this is how I'm going to do my grasses. Hold it like this, just the tip of the brush touching. This is not a complicated brush. This is a very simple, I think, local synthetic that I got from Lucky Store here. So it's not that it can do a lot that regular brushes can't do. It's just normal. And again, I'm going to do the same thing. Because this part is dried out a little bit, so I can. And I can make it a little bit darker also. And because I can see some sort of leaves here, now that's what I'm trying to do. But I'm still allowing some of the white spaces to show through. One very good way to make a dark green is either add say a little gray to it, or a dark blue like this one, or maybe add a red to it, because red and green are opposite to each other on the color wheel. So if I add a little bit of red, it makes a nice brown. At least most of them do. And if I add a little bit of brown here, darker brown, I can get quite a nice I think I'm going to let it dry for a bit now. I'm just taking a little bit of dark brown and just adding the warmer shadows, the darker shadows that one can see. I don't have to be very exact with it. It's a little reddish brown, so I'll because it's a little reddish brown, I'm adding a little bit of red. But the yellow inside is, I can leave the little places of yellow inside and it'll look like sunlight that is hitting the tree from this side. Again, just adding the shadows and the cuts wherever I can see them. And because I can see the texture in the tree like this, I'm just making these kind of marks. This part seems to be a little bit darker, so I'm just making it. Again, this is completely in shadow, so I'm adding a little bit of shadow, and wherever I want to add shadow, I can easily add a little bit of blue color. Shadow is supposed to be cool, so if you add a little bit of blue as against say yellow or red, which makes it look cool, warm, if I add a little bit of blue color, it automatically looks like shadow. Now one thing is, if I'm just sprinkling some plain water on it, some droplets of plain water on it, if you can see. That adds a little bit of texture to it, because if it dries, so you can lift it and it dries and you get some gritty texture on the thing. Now these leaves, I'm just going to kind of make the leaves here, the shape that I can see is a bit like this. Of about that size, so I'll just make it like that. And these are the darker leaves that I'm seeing. If I want to make them a little bit darker still, and I want to add a little bit of that shadow thing going on, then I add a little more blue to it. Like I told you, blue is a good shadow color, so if I add blue to my green, they become more shadowy. I want to make them darker still, I just add a little bit of uh, Payne's Grey or little diluted black. So all these leaves, because I'm making them on the darker background, they are all looking as if they're in shadow, and the rest of these leaves, when I make them here, they look as if there's light coming from the back. And then I don't add the blue. If you just notice that the way I'm making the leaves, I'm just making marks with my brush, how I think the leaves would be. I'm trying to make them a little bit smaller on this side, so we have that effect, of and then I do my favorite thing. This normally I would do to add a little bit of texture. I'm just trying to draw with my brush. It's got a nice point, so that's easy. And again, now I have some muddy kind of background here, which I'm going to just kind of, if I lay the brush really flat against my paper, I get this kind of effect. It's called a dry brush effect. Now this shadow, like I mentioned, a purple color is very nice. So you have blue, have a little bit of red, you get a nice purpley color. You can add a little bit of grey to it. And I can make the shadow. And now if I want to highlight a little bit, I can do it. This is the darkest edge of the tree. Basically now I'm just picking out the places where I'm still seeing the photo to be very, very dark. And if I think that this darkness is fine, I just leave it. But if I think that I could make it a little bit darker so that it stands out a little bit more, the contrast becomes more, I can do it. But basically I'm just fiddling now and I could easily leave it, which I think I will do now. And that should be all, except that we're going to now sign our name. And we're going to write the date. And that should be it.